Now that you have been fingerspelling for a little while and you have some good experience, here are 3 more tips for understanding fingerspelling when it's signed to you that are a little more advanced than the first 10 tips I gave you. All of these come from a fascinating research article by Leah C. Geer and Jonathan Keene called Improving ASL Fingerspelling Comprehension in L2 Second Language Learners with Explicit Phonetic Instruction, which was published in 2018. I think these are very helpful tips for understanding fingerspelling out in the real world. Tip number 1 is to watch for transitional handshakes. This is something we probably don't think about very much when we see fingerspelling because we think that we're just looking for letters. Actually, there's a lot more going on than just letters when a word is fingerspelled. So sometimes we look for just the hand shapes that are the letters, but Geer and Keene's research showed that there are actually transitional hand shapes interspersed in between letters, which, if you don't know what you're looking for, may complicate your understanding of a fingerspelled word. So Geer and Keene in their research used the example of the word sort. So, right, when I fingerspell it at a normal speed, you can see the letters if you're looking for them. But what you may not notice is that there are actually hand shapes in between each letter. So here's S. Now here's what the transition between S and O looks like. Right? As I come down to O. Here's what the transition between O and R looks like. Right? Then I get to the R. Here's what the transitional hand shape between R and T looks like. Okay, and all of those are in that word when I sign it. So tip number 1 is to remember that when you're reading fingerspelling, you're seeing letters and you're seeing the transitional hand shapes in between letters. They look a little bit different too. S to O is going to look a little bit different from S to A, etc. All right, tip number 2 is that fluent fingerspelling anticipates upcoming letters. So if you were just to walk up to me on the street and ask me what a J looks like, I would show you this. If I fingerspell something with J in the middle of it, like major, the J actually tends to take on a little bit of a different shape based on the letters that come before and after it. So, or you can kind of see how the J anticipates the O that's going to follow. Actually, let me do that faster. So as I do that, I actually open up that a little bit because I know that O is just coming next and it'll be easier to transition from J to O. So you see when I do that J, it's open, it's not closed like it was before. And I actually keep my thumb here because it's left over from the A. It's the A anticipating the J, it's the J anticipating the O, and then the R. So tip number 2 is just to remember that fluent native fingerspelling anticipates upcoming letters. And so they change a little bit in order to accommodate that. Last tip, tip number 3, is to look at the word as if it's a sign, not individual letters. So let me explain that a little bit. Deaf adults have been studied and shown in studies to be able to sign a fingerspelled word without always being able to spell it back correctly, whether that's written or fingerspelled. So let me give you an example. In other words, if someone signs, then a deaf person just recognizes that as lettuce. So if you say, what's the sign for They are not actually recognizing every letter in the word, deaf adults. They are seeing the overall shape of that word. Similarly, deaf children with early exposure to ASL have been shown in studies to recognize fingerspelled words as signs before they ever realize, oh, those are letters in there. A common example of that is rice. A deaf child will recognize as rice without knowing that that's an R and an I and a C and an E, because they don't spell yet, right? There isn't a sign for rice. It's a fingerspelled word. So if a deaf child has a parent saying, do you want, they recognize that as rice without being able to spell it, without even knowing that that's a combination of letters. Okay, so tip number 3, try looking at fingerspelled words as if they are a sign. Look for the shape of the letter and the overall movement of the word. Sorry, the shape of the word and the overall movement of the word, rather than looking for each individual letter. That is how native deaf signers understand fingerspelling, and it's how they understand so quickly. So these 3 tips for you are what help fluent fingerspellers, and so they can be very helpful for signers who are trying to become fluent fingerspellers.